Listeners of AI FYI, do you think AI is going to take over fast fashion?
Listen in to find out how AI is changing the garment industry.
How many robots do you think touched your shirt?
Oh, interesting.
I think 5.
I think 18.
18?
What do you think, Pico?
Yeah. Pico is distressed. Okay, so the reason I asked this is because today's topic is about garment construction and fashion and how AI is being
Ooh.
used in fashion. So before I get into it,
Nice.
have either of you guys ever sewn anything? Can you share that experience? How would you describe it?
I have. So I ripped my couch one time, and I attempted to. It was just like a tiny. It was like literally this big, and I sewed it back. Although I can't say it was particularly great, but it did hold up.
How long did it take you? Do you remember?
Um, I mean, like 10 minutes. The longest part was like putting the thread through the needle. That was definitely the hardest part.
I've sewn stuff. Most recently, I sewed some curtains. They were pretty straightforward, but I would agree the hardest part is threading that needle and then also the complicated process of using the bobbin in the sewing machine. It is the like under thread, like since you're stitching two threads together, you sort of have to make a mini thread and then load it in a very particular way into the sewing machine.
Yeah, so the way
Yeah, I
when
really
you
know nothing
sew,
about sewing.
you can push the needle into one side of the fabric, move your hand and pull it out the other side, and get very easily to weave through this. When a machine sews, you have a hook and a needle, and you're basically catching two pieces of thread on each other, so that the needle is just coming up and down. Up there's like two needles basically going up and down, catching on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to wind a bobbin, which is inside the bottom part of that machine, with the same color thread as what you have at the top of the machine, so that it doesn't look like there's two pieces of thread.
Yeah, that makes
I think
sense.
if you're an amateur, it's really easy to mess up and you have to like go undo stitches and like, yeah, sometimes the needle breaks. Yeah, it took me a couple tries now that I think about it.
Okay. And so let's imagine you were tasked with making a robot to sew a t-shirt. How would you do that? What do you think would be some of the challenges you faced?
hmm When a robot sews a t-shirt, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of like positioning of things. Like you need to like, move stuff around. So I feel like robot arms it's like a lot of programming, I feel like, to like get it into the perfect spot. And then there's also like things like patterns and sizes. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I'm just like have no idea how a machine would actually do all that stuff.
I just kind of assumed robots were already making t-shirts. I can't think of anything that would make it that hard because like we use sewing machines today, so why not automate those machines and program in like your twists and turns? Cutting the fabric would be difficult probably. Because probably a lot of fabric takes so many cuts.
Okay, so I picked this topic for just a couple of reasons. And I think you guys are going to, based on what you're saying, be shocked at what I tell you. So for
Okay.
one, I like clothes. I know both of you like clothes. The three of us have talked about this extensively. I personally have a love-hate relationship with them because I feel ecologically guilty about buying clothes. I buy a lot of them secondhand, but I can be kind of a clothes horse. Secondly, the environmental impact of clothing and its impact of international economies just keeps growing, and I have some stats to share on that. And thirdly, it's a tale of complete failure of AI. It's this. I'm going to do this again, where I take you from seed to store, and go a little bit beyond. And it's really interesting. I think of it almost as like a sandwich, where like the agriculture part, when you're growing crops that become linen, for example, or cotton, there's a lot of AI there. There's a lot of AI in marketing and ad tech and things like that. But in the actual manufacturing of clothes, there is no AI. No robot has ever sewn a piece of clothing. It happened once in a prototype, maybe twice, at a company. We'll talk about that. But like, it was because the piece of fabric got glued into a board and it basically acted like plywood. And that's why the robot was able to sew it. About the garment industry. As you guys know, we all wear clothes for the most part. And how much clothes we wear and how much clothes the average person owns has just continuously gone up and up and up in human history and through industrialization. And this has had huge impacts on so many things. 92 million tons of textile waste is created annually. 92 million tons.
What? What
That's
do they do
And-
with all that? They just throw it?
Oh, I'll explain. It's nuts. It's also expected to increase by 60% by 2030. And these are not like doomsday numbers. This is like, we'll link it in the show notes, but this is like solid research. This is maybe a conservative estimate. For example, about 30% of clothing that's made is never sold. It's surplus stock or things that were sent to the wrong store or whatever. So, for example, H&M has admitted to burning, just setting on fire, 12 tons of unsold clothing every year since 2013.
What? Why
That's
don't they
crazy.
just give it away? Why would they? What a
Kieran,
waste.
There's no money
I
in
wonder-
giving things away.
But there's
Yeah.
also no money in burning it. Like, what?
I also wonder if like does the world have a problem with people not having clothes? Like the world has a problem with people not being fed and going hungry, but are we just living in a like age of abundance with clothes, or is it that they don't want to give things away?
I believe so, because what I've heard is that when clothes are donated and sent, like, in America, it was like, oh, it's sent to poor Africa, blah, blah, blah. No, there's like mountains of t-shirts nobody wants there. Like,
Yeah.
they also don't want the Britney Spears concert t-shirt from 2014. Like, and to be more explicit
knew?
numbers, yeah, the total number of garments, like if you count every individual item, has actually doubled. How much we make in a year doubled since 2000. And starting in 2014, we produce over 100 billion garments a year. So let me do the math real quick. There's what, like 8 billion of us?
Yeah, it's like
So it's
10 times the
100.
number of people every single year.
Yeah, it's like 12 garments per person per year. Which, like, some of those people are babies and they need a lot of stuff, so I guess that makes sense. And socks and underwear,
Mm-hmm.
But it's 100 billion garments a year. And
That's wild.
we have so much clothes and so little of it is actually used for its full lifespan. And then people kind of rationalize, well, I'm going to recycle this fabric, but actually less than 14% of the clothes and shoes that you set aside to be recycled end up being recycled. And then of what is collected for recycling, only 1% can actually be used to make new clothing. So it's pretty much a one-way door, right? Like something gets turned into string, gets turned into fabric, gets turned into a garment, becomes trash. That's the line. And there's some caveats there, but that's pretty much it. And I look up sort of like recent articles in how generative AI is changing the garment industry, and I find McKinsey, released an article this month that says, quote, generative AI has the potential to help fashion businesses become more productive, get to market faster, and serve customers better. And I wrote under that bullet point in my notes, how is that the problem we are solving?
I know. It's not like
Yeah.
we have a shortage of clothes. We don't need more productivity. We need more efficiency.
Yeah, stop burning 12 tons of clothes a year, H&M. So
Crazy. It's also crazy to me because you would think maybe these companies would hold on to it because, I don't know, fashion comes around, right? Is it worth burning, or could you, I don't know, hold on to it for like 15 years and then sell it again? How
But
much
then
does it
they'll have
change?
15 years stockpile of billions of t-shirts. Like, I doubt they want to do that. It's probably at that point cheaper to burn it than to store it.
Yeah.
And this can get kind of interesting because the US Department of Agriculture did a challenge a couple years ago where they said it was called the Bury Your Underpants Challenge. And they told farmers to test the health of their soil, take a pair of cotton underwear and dig a hole like 8 inches underground and put the cotton underwear in there and leave it. And after 3 months, the cotton should have completely dissolved and only the elastic remains. So, like, not all of it is immediately trash. You can compost natural fibers. But yeah, huge waste. And even compost requires good soil health and efficiencies. Or even cotton clothing ends up getting burned or in the landfill or lots of other unsavory things
Yeah.
in that process.
And I imagine most of our clothes are not natural fibers. It's probably, a lot of polyester, a lot of microplastics.
And on top of that, when you think about everything that's manufactured and how many goods we have around us now, it's a bit surreal when you think everything you have ever worn, maybe even everything you will ever wear, was made by a person. Every stitch was a person.
Wait, so they don't use like machines to do the stitching, or you're saying like a person is running the machine and it's like
A
one to
person has to
one,
run
like
the
person
machine.
and clothes.
As the person has to run the machine.
There's no like assembly lines of clothes.
No. And I'll talk to you about the
That's what-
garment construction process, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would have imagined. But I'm guessing you're going to tell us why it's very hard for a automated machine system to do clothes.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because we've been sharing the story of big industries and little industries that are getting totally transformed by AI. And on the surface, we'll talk about this, it does seem like the fashion industry is poised to really change with this technological boom. But if you dig a little bit deeper, it had its big technological boom in the 1800s, and there hasn't been much change since. So I'm going to, again, go from soil to the consumer. And I'm going to walk through the entire sort of garment life cycle. So the agricultural production of fibers or the creation of synthetic fiber, the weaving of fibers into cloth, the design and print making process, garment construction, and the miscellaneous manufacturing surrounding that, then the social media and advertising of that garment, the retail and consumer interaction, and then when you bring it home, that garment care.
Nice, let's do
Yeah,
it.
let's do it.
Okay, great. So again, starting as always in agriculture, all fibers, so most fibers you can basically think of as being synthetic or natural. Natural would be when you take the little fluff from a cotton plant, or you take the reed of a flax plant and you beat it into linen. You can also have synthetic fibers. These are your spandex, your elastanes. This is like the stretchy plastics, essentially. And there's some overlap in the middle, because if you think of plastics as being these really large hydrocarbons coming from like petrochemicals, they're really complex sugars, essentially. You can make blended synthetic natural fiber blends that no one can decide is this natural or synthetic. Like one of my favorites is called Modal, and it technically starts off as bamboo pulp, but then it goes through so much processing, it's essentially a plastic. Is it a synthetic fiber? Is it a natural fiber? Unclear. But
Yeah, I was actually wondering that because we got I saw like this advertisement for bamboo like bed sheets, and it's supposed to keep you cold, like cooler at night. But I'm like, how do you make bed sheets out of bamboo? Like,
Okay,
sounds
yeah.
really hard.
So, in case anybody's curious, and this matters, the way you turn a plant into a piece of cloth is the plant's got really long, stringy fibers in it. Think of like a loofah, and you dry the plant and you smack it. In the case of cotton, it's already fluffy and dry. You card that smacked stuff, so that's basically taking all the fibers, stretching them out, and aligning them into evenly spaced, flat, smooth individual strings, essentially. Then you have to
Mm.
spin that. Women used to do this work by hand. Spin the fibers like a rope, you could imagine, into one thread, many fibers. And
Mm,
then that thread is woven or knit into a fabric. That's the kind of the overall process.
hmm
Which used to be done by a loom.
Yes, and is actually still done by a loom, but we'll explain some of that. So
Hmm.
I thought I'd share that fun story. I don't remember if we shared in any other episodes of when I was in India working on self-driving cars, and I suddenly learned about cotton farming. So I'm in India, central India, visiting one of our partners where there were people annotating images for self-driving cars. And when they didn't have data labeling work, they ran a little farm where they would grow food to supply for the local school, the same people that we were working with. And I'm not going to kid anybody. We were out there in the morning with a 40 walking around, and I was complaining about another one of our clients who was working on some agriculture stuff. And they were basically trying to detect cotton seedlings. Like, imagine you have a field and you've got little cotton plants. They look like weeds, okay? Except they're intermixed with actual weeds. And trying to figure out what's a cotton plant and what's a weed was, to me, impossible. And I was trying to figure out
hmm
how we were going to get this data labeled to make this training set when the person I was hanging out with is like, oh, well, this is cotton. And we're standing in a field, and I look around and I'm like, we're standing in cotton? He's like, yeah. I was like, you guys, you know what cotton looks like? He's like, oh, yeah, yeah. A lot of these people used to do cotton farming before they came and did data labeling. I'm like, that's good to know. I was able to call the customer, get them involved in that project, finding the right people for the right tool. It was really awesome. But I just remember feeling so absurd, standing in a cotton field, being like, not realizing I was standing in a cotton field, complaining about not being able to find labeled data to train an algorithm to detect cotton. It was just ridiculous. So
Yeah,
obviously,
what a
Sounds like
coincidence.
serendipity.
yeah. In the farming of fibers, bamboo, cotton, flax, there's a lot of agricultural advancements. I won't beleaguer that. We've gone over pesticide use and so on and so forth. But that's certainly happening in a lot of garment crops because there's just such a large volume of them and there's a lot of money to be made in improving use of crops there. But where we're seeing more innovation in technology is in the creation of synthetic fibers. So, synthetic fibers are really awesome and really bad. So, for example, I'm a big fan of leggings and fleece and like nice tech wear. I can see right now I'm wearing a cotton shirt. I think looks like Joe's wearing a cotton shirt, and Kieran, you look like you're wearing a track jacket.
I think
I bet
this
that
is like
track jacket,
polyester. Yeah.
yeah, and it probably is a nice windbreaker. I like that. Um, but the problem is that a lot of these synthetic fabrics, they're essentially plastic. And on top of that, they're not very robust plastic. So they're a huge contributor to microplastic waste. If you take your fleece sweater and you wash and dry it like regular, you're releasing microplastic through the hose out of your washing machine every single time you wash it.
Mm.
Fun fact, you can buy a little thing to trap the microplastics, not to rinse them into the water supply. Everybody should add that to their synthetic wash. But um, so, but at the same time, these synthetic materials can be more durable, more specialized. Technical gear, they're incredibly useful, right? Water repellency, and there's some other really cool stuff. So there's a lot to be gained in making synthetic materials better, cheaper, more reliable, less impactful on the environment. And there's a lot of investment being done in that right now. So, for example, this article came out in a paper in November of 2023, so that was just 4 months ago. Some folks over at Google DeepMind and some people at Lawrence Berkeley Lab and a few other groups came together and built something called GNOME, Graphical Networks for Material Exploration. And essentially, they put that into something called a lab or autonomous lab. They were just in general trying to figure out how do they use AI and robotics to massively scale the discovery of synthetic polymers, not just for clothing, but they were thinking like for batteries and solar panels and all the other things that we rely on complex polymers for and materials. And it's pretty cool. So they have actually already predicted the structure of 2.2 million new materials. More than 700 of them have been created and are being tested right now for what they're like. And then they have this autonomous system, which is literally like, think of like an easy bake oven for materials. And they put like a bunch of ingredients that you would find in your organic chemistry class, like in little vials. And then it like the AI does some stuff and then the robot tries to manufacture that material. So the next person, the human just shows up and has to test it. An autonomous system that combines robotics with artificial intelligence to create entirely new materials has released its first trove of discoveries. The system, known as the A-Lab, devises the recipe for the materials, including some that might find use in batteries or solar cells. Then it carries out the synthesis and analyzes the products, all without human intervention. Meanwhile, another AI system has predicted the existence of hundreds of thousands of stable materials, giving the A-Lab plenty of candidates to strive for in the future. Over 17 days of operation, the A-Lab successfully synthesized 41 of 58 target materials that span 33 elements and 41 structural prototypes.
Whoa.
I think this
That's
does
so cool.
highlight one of the powers of AI, which is scaling. I mean, I feel like I've heard of other applications where you can just do the calculus of looking at like millions of options so much quicker once you just input the variables, like far more quicker than a human. I wonder what, maybe we'll get to this, but like what sort of traits are they looking for when they analyze it? Like, are they by chance looking for like compostability or something with like sustainability in mind?
In the paper, they're really focused on test polymers for other commercial applications, like in manufacturing and like battery stuff, and to replace some other components. But I think it's quite clear to see how this technology, they're going to discover new plastics. They're going to discover new fabrics. And then they'll realize, oh, this is one of the largest industries on Earth with the largest consumption of waste. And in some sense, this could be, we talk a lot about how could our future become like Star Trek? They should just open source all these polymers at some point. Like if they can, over a couple of weeks, invent 2.2 million hypothetical ones, then find out 700 of them could be real. It's not like the people who built this are going to have 700 different applications for this. No, you just throw it out in the world and the people figure out what to do with it, right? So I think this is really going to help feed sort of consumer demand for sustainability and ethical production of garments. It's not clear to me how fast it's going to go from this paper that was released in November to actually using some of these synthetic materials, but it's going to impact so many industries, right? Material designs and material systems has changed forever.
I mean, more than the materials, the thing that's really interesting to me is that machine. Like that sounds closest to like a replicator that we've gotten.
Yeah. Replicator being like a 3D printer.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to put in the ingredients, but I saw a picture and I'll send you guys the link to the article afterwards. It looks like a giant, those robots that make you coffee at the airport? It looks like that, but with more stuff.
Oh, wow.
In the
Interesting.
That was my
And so is it like an arm that's like doing stuff or like?
I think it's arms. Hold on. Let me find the paper and see if I can pull it up for you guys. And maybe I wasn't looking very carefully. I'm going to share my screen.
And Andy, I appreciate your optimism about this sort of opening up a more ethical world, but I worry it would go the way of pharmaceuticals where, they're going to hold on to this tight because they know they might have a bunch of discoveries on their hands and they won't like release it for open use in any way unless there's like a patent system that forces them to after, a certain date.
It just takes one person to accidentally upload this to Wikimedia. So I don't know if you guys can see this. Maybe you can describe it for the audience who isn't watching.
Very hard to describe. I'm looking at a very complicated series of graphs and machinery.
Yeah, I mean, it basically just looks like a machine warehouse with like some sort of assembly line type looking thing, and then like a bunch of box looking things, and then an arm looking thing. Yeah,
it's
a lot of.
It's giving Westworld to me. Like in the opening credits of Westworld, they show that machine that's like building the human out of like milk. Do you remember that?
It does. Yeah.
There's there's like an arm and like a platform in the center of a modern looking lab room.
It's a more zoomed in version.
That is a very giant arm, though. It seems like in that top picture, that seems like a human size arm. It's crazy.
And it has this whole like, I'm gonna call it a pantry available to it, full of specialty materials to do organic, and looks like there might be like some oven. Like it's a little bit of an easy bake situation.
Actually, those dispenser things remind me of like the candy dispensers. You know, when you go to like a candy shop and there's just like all the dispensers on the wall. It's like those, and you can just get like all the different candies.
And the pantry reminds me of like a Lazy Susan, where you just spin to choose what you want.
Nice.
So I think that's awesome.
Very cool.
Like I mentioned, this came up in my research, and I was like, to me, it seems quite clear that many of the polymers and materials that they come up with will have direct applications to garments. Whether the people who are working on that have quite realized that or not. I also found something really cool that happened and was announced in December of 2023. So that's also about 3.5 months ago. So this company out of Hong Kong, or this group called the Laboratory for Artificial Intelligence in Design, AID Lab. I'm going to read from the top of this article because I think Reuters did a really good job summarizing this. Simple gestures could be all it takes to alter the color of your clothes of the future. According to a research team that has developed a color-changing textile embedded with a tiny camera and making use of artificial intelligence. Wow. So I mentioned that the way you make fabric is you have many threads that are like smushed together, woven, or twisted together individual fibers. As they weave the fabric, one of the threads they have in their loom is actually a polymer optical fiber, which I think is something similar to what they use in fiber optic, like lighting.
Fiber optic?
Yeah. And it can pop up into different colors. And then they put a computer vision system on it where if you thumbs up in front of the fabric, it turns it blue. If you make a little heart sign, it turns it pink. If you go, okay, it turns it green.
What?
That's incredible.
And
that's so cool.
Yeah. There's a mobile app, and you can customize the gestures and the colors. And you can teach it to distinguish the gesture of like your gesture versus the person standing next to you or somebody else that is in your household.
That's incredible. I could see that being used for even like wallpaper or ship sales.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So there's a professor, John Tan, who works at the Polytechnic University School of Fashion and Textiles. And she headed the research team that built this. And she made a note that the POFs are made of polymethyl methacrylate, which is actually recyclable. And the structure of the textile is easily separated so that you can separate the yarn from the POFs for recycling.
Oh, nice.
So hopefully it's not, you can like weave it into organic cloth made out of cotton, for example, and then essentially I assume they run a magnet or something through it to take all the fibers out that are not cotton, so you can compost the cotton and keep the fibers.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't that so
Does
neat?
it require like some sort of batteries or something, or
I'm just
like
gonna ask
where's
that.
the energy source for that?
Body
Let me
heat.
pull up
That'd be really cool.
That'd be cool.
kinetic energy from you moving.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
there's
then it
a
would be
video.
like Avatar, except instead of like the ground changing colors while they're walking, it's like your clothes are changing colors while you're moving. Whoa, that'd be so cool.
Wow.
All right.
We're looking at
Gonna-
a blue fabric. Andy has pulled up a video.
Wow. It looks
It's
like a dress or
beautiful.
something with like a bunch of fibers. It kind of looks
They
like,
have a
you know, those
shirt.
fiber optic, they're like those little lights, but then they have like, it's just like the fiber optic. It looks like a waterfall or something.
Folks, if any
Yeah,
of you read the
so
book, there's a handbag.
What?
It's
yeah,
so
we're
cool.
for folks listening, we're watching a video of someone wearing a garment, and we see, yeah, it looks like the
Yeah, it's basically like fiber optics.
fiber optics mixed into the fabric, an app to control it. I wonder how well you can see it during the day. They seem to be showcasing it at night or in the dark.
Yeah.
Also wonder how
Yeah.
comfortable it is. Like, do you feel like you're wearing,
Like
an
plastic.
electronic? Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the demo, they're showing it change color with people's gesturing, but it's the fabric's hung in a frame like it's a tapestry. So regarding Joe's power, how is it powered? How does it wear? I think they've got a little bit left to figure out, but not bad. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and what I'm want to shout out is if you're one of those people who, like me, has read the book "To Light the Lightning" by Ada Palmer. I think I've mentioned it on this podcast before. If you think about the utopians and their personalized, always changing scene clothes, their griffin cloaks, this is the fabric that would make the griffin cloak. That's my nerd moment of the day.
So is the AI in that how they're actually creating those fibers, or how they're integrating it into the cloth? Like, where's the AI?
So based off the
that?
pictures that I'm seeing, the fabric has a control system that seems to go into a separate component that's running some computer vision AI program.
Oh, okay. So the AI is primarily for like the gesture, and then detecting the gesture and then changing colors.
Exactly.
Got it.
So yeah, I think that is sort of the major two things I had to share when it comes to the advances of the creation of synthetic fibers. But even there, I would say the advances are somewhat modest relative to other industries. Tell me if you think I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I'm surprised to hear that there's nothing in, it sounds like, the manufacturing of these items. It's like in discovery of fibers, which I don't know about you, but I can't think of, there's like 6 different fabrics I think all my clothes are made out of. So I can't imagine like suddenly all these new types of fabrics that I like would be purchasing. So it seems like they're maybe not particularly impactful, at least in the short term. And then, yeah, so like manufacturing, it didn't sound like there's anything. And then it sounds like the like recycling of it is a huge problem, and it doesn't sound like there's anything being done there, which is shocking.
So I think like these days we hear about so much AI innovation happening due to LLMs, and I just can't imagine, other than like in marketing, how LLMs could alter how we make clothes and materials. I mean, maybe someone's working on that, but maybe fashion and textiles has missed the boat on this latest AI innovation.
So let's talk about the next step in the production of a garment, which is you've got the material, you got the fiber, and you've spun it into thread, and now you must weave cloth. There are 2 types of cloth, pretty much. There's woven or knit. So woven, think of your bed sheets. You've got a weft and I forgot the name of the other direction of thread is, but think of the traditional loom. And when you think of that's a woven fabric. Knit, think of your sweaters. So this is when you have one thread interlocking with other threads to make in total a whole material.
So is
This,
crocheting a knit pattern?
yeah, if you were to crochet a blanket, you've basically made a knit piece of fabric.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
My mom is big into
But
crocheting, so I've seen that a lot.
yeah, and you can think about like your sweaters that you wear. If you look at it, it looks like tiny little crochet hooks, right? Like because it's been tinily knitted, so to speak. And everything else, you'll see basically two directions. If you zoom in on your clothes that you're wearing right now, you'll see even in your polyester clothes, there's a horizontal and a vertical thread that has
Yeah, it's like a
interwoven.
square pattern. Yeah.
So this is what you need to do to make fabric is you take strings and you smush them together in ways that will hold them together. And this is something that had huge technological transformations ages ago. And this is actually the origin of computer science. I think you guys know this. So jacquard looms. Jacquard is a type of, I believe it's a knit fabric. Might be woven, I'm not sure. Where you end up with a pattern woven in by the threads. So instead of having like, imagine you have like a white t-shirt and you silk screen a logo on top. Everybody's got a shirt like that. That's one way to get a print onto a t-shirt, right? You glue it on, you paint it on. The other option is kind of what you see in a knitted sweater, like those Fair Isle ones, where the actual thread changes color strategically so that this pattern is revealed in the weave of the material. And looms have long been kind of a place where technological innovation has happened to enable things like that. Basically, fancy fabric is for rich people. Yes, Pico, you tell them. And
Pico likes that.
yeah. So fancy fabric's been for rich people. And there's a lot of money. Like clothes are so expensive for so much of human history because a person has to loom the fabric, spin the thread, then thread and loom the fabric, and then sew it. Like it's so much work. And by a person, I mean women, predominantly women in all cultures. So clothes are so expensive. And if you could make your fabrics, your patterns, etc., really extravagant, then you could command a much higher price. And the wealthy were always commissioning people to make even more elaborate silk brocades, jacquards, etc. So women invented computer programming using jacquard looms, where you would, if you think about the way this works, you have a bunch of spools of thread going into a loom. And let's say, hypothetically, you have 100 going vertically and 100 going horizontally. You have 200 spools of thread, and they're going up and down. Yeah, so then you've got 100 pieces of thread going this way. That'd be a very, very small, narrow piece. It's usually hundreds. But this way and this way, you got spools, and you can change the pattern of which threads are up, which ones are down, and which ones are going basically relative to each other to evoke different patterns. And they would take cards and punch holes into them and thread each single string through it. And then those cards would be programmed. They were simple algorithms for how to create certain floral patterns or damask patterns. Those punch cards is what was used in the initial computer programming. It was the exact same style punch card that's in jacquard looms.
Wow.
So is the modern day like microprocessor comparable to those cards? Is that right? Like an or a descendant of those cards?
Well, I mean, the concept is the same. So the concept is that you have a series of, just like an array, like a row of items, and each item can be like a 1 or a 0. And so with the punch cards, the 1 is like, I punched it, and the 0 is like it wasn't punched, or vice versa. So it's basically indicating like a binary code through the existence or non-existence of those holes. And that's the same concept in a microprocessor, but yeah, very different execution because we're now using like silicon and memory banks and things like that. But yeah, same concept.
And that's why some people argue that this is actually the beginning of computer programming, not so much the Babbage machine, because Jacquard looms have been around for a couple hundred years. Today, there are computerized flat knitting and weaving machines. Human beings still have to do the part you guys hate. Take the thread, put it through the little hole. But once somebody loads up these giant robots, they will weave the fabric, boom, 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 and make a bolt of fabric, right? So if you've ever been to a fabric store, you see it's like really certain width and it's really, really long. That's because it's the width of the machine, and then it just sort of like prints fabric essentially by adding more pieces. It has a maximum length based off the length of the threads in the weft. And you then, as the fabric comes out, somebody rolls it up onto a bolt. That bolt of fabric gets sent to a fabric store. Somebody can buy it, cut some fabric off, and make some clothes. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense, and I'm glad that the like full sheet of fabric isn't hand woven. I'm glad we've been able to automate that part because that would be an insane amount of work.
Yeah, and there's a really cool article I found. I won't talk about it now, but I'll send a link about how the invention of weaving machines actually changed the economy for women in Africa. Weaving has historically been a lot of work that women do that we now don't have to do. So bless. But it has implications in large parts. So there's some AI being added to this, but it's the same stuff that's going into every factory operation. So quality control operations, predictive maintenance on the machines, scheduling workloads. So these looms, these robotic looms, these are handmade, incredible machines. And if you are, let's say, a fabric designer, you don't buy a loom. You like design a fabric and then you give it to a production facility, and you make an order for like, make me 200,000 yards of this fabric for my production run of this t-shirt. They have to then batch make that, and it takes months. Like everything, they have to predict these design process out really far ahead in advance. I'll explain more about that to get all of it ordered. So there's now some cool AIs for like clever scheduling, so that they're doing the least changing of threads and materials and stuff between batches, so it can go faster.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the AI here is very much, and the machine, it's not necessarily all of it's machine learning. Some of it is. Some of it's just classical algorithms. But it's very basic stuff, and there's not currently a lot of innovation, and we have not seen a big jump in automation in the last 20, 30 years.
I read that book, The Secret Life of Groceries. Andy, I think you read it too. But it talked about that with food production as well, how you have these factories that just sort of schedule in the production of different food items, and they have to schedule that very carefully and like switch things out when it's time to switch over.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you could bring AI in for like logistics of planning that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, supply chain management and all these things. More on that to follow. But yeah, Joe, I only read the first chapter of that book. It made me too sad because it was about the truckers. I think I told you I needed a break because I couldn't read about the truckers. Anyway.
Yeah. Trucking system's wild.
So we've talked about how do you go from plant or plastic to cloth. In another world is that one lady from The Invisibles with the glasses designing the clothes, having a vision for what she wants the garment to look like.
The Incredibles.
The Incredibles. Remember what's her name? Edna?
Yeah.
Edna Mode.
Edna Mode. Yeah, so unrelated to the production of the material, Edna Mode is shopping for fabrics, looking at the options, and saying, I would like to manufacture these dresses, these whatever jumpsuits, whatever she's making them. And there's a bunch of AI in this space, actually. Not in the actual production, but I would say in toy use cases right now. And I'll explain that. So, if you are one of the multi-billion-dollar fashion houses or brands, or multi-million-dollar, if you're H&M, Zara, Old Navy, you're using AI to do trend forecasting and trying to predict from all the social media, online searches, and sales data what you need to manufacture when for sales. So, for example, this whole process can be months and months. So, if you're like, what's going to be in fashion for babies to wear in Easter 2024? You have to plan the buying of the fabric, the designs, the dyeing of the fabric, like basically last summer. And whoever can do this fastest wins. For example, Zara's been able to eat a lot of the market because they shared at like a shareholder meeting that they're able to go from seeing something on a runway to copying it to manufacturing it to having it in stores in less than 4 months. And that's like lightning fast, but it's still 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
This reminds me of that scene in Devil Wears Prada where Miranda Priestley is explaining to Anne Hathaway that it's not something that just happens. There's like a whole cycle of the fashion industry that everyone has to like keep up with.
Well, the interesting thing from like a consumer standpoint is I just kind of get whatever's there. So like to me, I don't realize how early or late their design process is, because like when I show up at the store, it's like whatever's available. That's the thing that I think is in season. So it's interesting that there's like this whole cycle of like trying to get ahead of those designs, because in the future it's going to be too late by the time my design came out.
Yeah. But ultimately, that's a bit of data analysis. It still comes down to human beings to then design that garment. And it's that whole design of clothes is way more technical than people think. And I'll explain why. The designer is going to say, I would like a pair of shorts. I have a tank top here from the San Diego Zoo that I will use to demonstrate for video listeners and to describe. So let's say I know I want to make a tank top, and I draw a picture of this. There's another person, often referred to as a cutter, who has to look at this and be like, where do the seams need to be placed to yield the shape that the designer drew? Like the shoulder seam on my shirt is very different than the shoulder seam on Kieran's sweat jacket right now. Very different than on this tank top. And if you think about anything that's even remotely structured or form-fitting, dresses, jackets, coats, where the seams go is really important. And as I mentioned, when fabric is made, it has a maximum width because that's how wide the machines are. So you have to do this process where the cutter who makes the pattern from the design eventually has to work with other people to figure out what's the best way to get the most pattern pieces cut most efficiently out of one bolt of fabric with the least waste possible.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just
you're like Tetrising all of like the individual items on like this big
but you
sheet.
can't you definitely can't Tetris it.
There's probably a lot of complication and challenges too in the designer communicating like the 3D shape. I mean, it's not 2D. It's like from 360 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. And like I told you, Kieran, you can't Tetris it because I told you about there's a thread going vertical and a thread going horizontal. If you have to keep the grain straight. If you pick a pattern piece and tilt it, you're going to end up with clothes that twist. If you ever had some clothing that like for some reason never stays in the right spot, or you have like a seam and it always kind of goes a little cattywampus, it's because the fabric accidentally went a little sideways.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And you get different amounts of stretch vertically versus horizontally. So whether each piece should get cut vertically or horizontally is a decision that has to be made based off whether it's at the top or the bottom of the garment, how much weight is it going to hold.
I wonder then when you go to like Ross or Marshalls or like one of those discount stores, if those items were actually like the items where, you know, like the stitching direction didn't come out perfectly, and like that's why it's like, oh, it ended up in a discount bin.
Yeah, a lot of that is the case. Now, outlet markets and those things have been bastardized in different ways, but to reduce the waste, if you can reuse that fabric. But it means that if you have, think about how much work it took to even just get a piece of fabric, and then the design has big sleeves and big holes or whatever. So there's a big space of cutout that can't even be used for anything, that you're throwing away. Huge surface areas of fabric. There's a company that works in manufacturing robots and tools for factories that's starting to add AI to their robots. And it's being adopted, and it's really cool. They have one called Fabric Optimizer, which comes with the cut and kit operations robot, where they do use data analytics and certain types of machine learning. I'm not exactly sure what, for selecting the best way to optimize this, as well as best ways to use remnants. Those are if you can't get a whole pattern piece, but you have a pretty good chunk, can you reuse that remnant in any way? They're using AI
like
to
put
figure
pockets
that out.
on all the shirts or something.
Yeah.
Pockets. More pockets.
Oh yeah, or if the pocket is already part of the pattern, maybe you realize at the end that you can predict how many remnants you will have, and will it cut enough pockets if you just get the pockets out of the remnants. So they have a bunch of customer testimonials on their website. The brand Ethan Allen uses in their factories this tool with this type of AI, but this is just one tiny bit of automation, and it's really assisting people more than replacing work in order to figure out this pattern drafting, design, cutting process. Once you have it figured out, you make a die cut robotic stamp and it just cuts like 100 layers of fabric at one time. That's automation, not even AI. Super simple. But the actual figuring it out is deeply complicated.
Huh, interesting. So they are using AI in manufacturing to get like the most clothes out of a single sheet of cloth or something.
Yeah, and they're also using it in like supply chain for all these things. So like figuring out what needs to get sent where and what the most efficient shipping routes are. But it's all, it's really interesting to me, it's all tangential to actually sewing the clothes. It's everything that has to happen before. Yeah.
Right.
And then like I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of Gen AI toy use cases for fashion design. The coolest one I saw was called the new black.ai. It's like a image generation tool for making fashion designs, and they clearly have a bunch of system prompting happening to help you generate really realistic 3D renders of clothing. And unclear if any designers actually use that, or do they just like to use their imagination and make prototypes and draw. And quite frankly, there's a mountain of these I wrote into my notes, Gen AI print on demand trash. So it's all the same print on demand stuff, but you can now put Dolly's bad art on it. A bajillion of those.
Yeah.
This does remind me, I follow some Instagram accounts where they're using AI to do image generation on like interior design spaces. Basically like feed it a picture of my space and then let the AI do a creative take on it. I also, more to the point of fashion, I follow an account where it's like how do I describe it? There's RuPaul's Drag Race, and there's a lot of like fashion innovation happening with the looks on that show. Someone has created
Hot
an
glue
account
is
where
not fashion.
But conceptually, like wild ideas, avant-garde,
Okay.
costume,
Yes.
It's like prototyping clothes.
Yeah, and so someone is doing like a completely AI generated RuPaul's Drag Race competition on Instagram where they like ask the AI to make outfits, and the outfits are insane and would be absolutely crazy to construct, but like conceptually it's inventing new like concepts and looks, which I don't know if the human imagination can like even go there.
The thing I kind of thought about when you were talking about the designers was like music. And I think there's a lot of like AI sounds. So like AI has generated some sound. And so I imagine like the music producers, they're maybe taking some of these different things that AI is making and then using that to compose their final work. And so I wonder if like designers are doing that where like they're using the AI as kind of like inspiration or like seeds, but then the ultimate like final design is really still like a human assembling that or construct or like coming up with it.
Yeah, and when I look at the testimonials on the new black.ai website, that seems to be basically it. They can help you go from like your sketch to prototypes or mix and match things, try something out in different lengths. So it's about assisting a designer in realizing their vision and ideating rather than replacing a designer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So then we've got the fabric, we've got the materials, we've got the designs. All that's left to do is make the garment. So this is a task that is largely performed by human labor. I was not able to find anything but 1 or 2 instances of robots having ever sewn anything. And the instance was a t-shirt and a pair of prototype Levi's, and they were so expensive that website, the company that claims to do this, hasn't had a LinkedIn post in 8 months. Who knows if they still exist.
I wonder why it's so expensive, because you'd think if you took the human labor out of it, you could scale it and just like be printing these things, but clearly it didn't go well or
So,
isn't going well.
but taking a step back, the way this works in the real world is that you have to have a lot of skilled human labor to assemble garments. So, what does the capitalist do? They find where labor is cheap, which is places that legalize slavery, right? Basically. And then they buy masses of it and they try to push for productivity gains out of sewing factories. I'm not going to go into depth here, but like the amount of tragedies that have happened for humans sewing clothes is unimaginable. Just Google any of the large fabric sewing fires that happened in India in the last 20 years, where like 800 people die in 20 minutes because capitalism, because cheap clothes. Like, it's tragic. That's
Damn.
full stop. It just is what it is. And the reason why you need human labor for this, why can't a robot do this? I mentioned to you guys Sobo Inc. that made that one robotic complete garment once. They had to take the fabric and put a glue in it and make it like hard as a board. And then they took actually an off the shelf like manufacturing robot for working with wood and modified it to cut and weld with glue the fabric the way that you would work with wood. Because fabric is wildly unpredictable. As far as I know, doing something like having a crumpled up towel and having an AI figure out a robotic arm to unfold and fold that towel, that was like a 45-minute machine learning problem a couple years ago. Maybe it's faster now, but that's just folding a rectangle.
Wow.
And look at the seams of your clothes, how many little corners and folds and stitches there are.
I think the thing, like as I'm thinking about it, that's probably the limiting factor here right now is actually the hardware that would be used. So I think like software wise, it's a solvable problem to figure out how to manipulate this fabric. But I think the hardware is probably where it's like really difficult to build something that's actually able to adapt to all of the inputs that are coming from that software looking at the clothes.
I also think maybe this could be easier. It could be easier if we all wore like one type of shirt made out of one type of fabric in like one size. But like we talked about, fashion is changing so often and materials that like you couldn't build something that, you know, it would be irrelevant in a 4 months or however often fashion changes.
And if you've ever done any sewing, you know that even if you make the same garment 5 times, you make it differently every time. Because even in that cutting process, depending on where you were in that bolt of fabric, it could be a little different. And you might need to manipulate
Yeah.
each seam a little bit differently. So there's a ton of judgment. I'm going to read a quote from ChatGPT because I asked it to summarize for me. Why is this so hard? And it did a better job than I did. AI and robots face challenges in sewing fabric due to the intricacies involved in handling and manipulating soft materials, which require high levels of dexterity and adaptability. Sewing also involves numerous variable factors, like fabric type, thickness, and the complexity of designs, which are difficult for current robotics to manage with the precision and flexibility of human hands. While advancements are being made, the nuanced judgment and manual adjustment skills of human operators is still unmatched by robots in most sewing tasks.
Yeah, so that's it. It's really like the mechanical side of like manipulating the physical materials. And that's what I think the software is definitely something that we would be able to build. It's the how do you actually communicate that into the physical world and then manipulate these things. Um,
And as I understand from the software side, it's possible, it's just not feasible because of the
mhm.
huge number of unpredictable variables. Like it becomes, my best friend's going to listen to this and give me a whole math lecture about it. But like the three body problem, where we can't even predict how three things with gravity will impact the fourth thing. Like we don't even have the physics figured out for four objects at once. Like fabric is so unpredictable and it has so much surface area and it can glisten and sheen. It can have weird properties. It's the computation to predict what we can quickly infer. It's just a big, heavy operation. And what are you going to do? Run that on the edge on a sewing machine, on a sewing robot? Maybe. Not this year. Not
Mhm.
next year.
Yeah. Yeah, mechanics is definitely hard to do very intricate things. And that's why it's like we can barely get a robot to like sit properly in a chair because like even though for us it's like such a simple operation, the balance of those like actual robots is really difficult to accomplish. Whereas humans like we just do it naturally.
So crazy that the thing that sort of originated computing can't be conquered by computing.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy how much waste there is, and like none of the production stuff even matters because like we already have overproduction of garments. So it's like, okay, well, we need to figure out the disposal of garments.
Robots can't sew clothes, but yet we're trying. The company Sobo said that they have a goal of avoiding labor issues and shortening supply chains, which will help reduce the complexity and headaches surrounding today's intricate global supply network. And much like that quote from McKinsey, I'm like, what problem are we solving? We have so much clothes, we set it on fire en masse. And the problem is what? Paying people a living wage? Not having them, like, isn't it much easier technically for everybody to just have more durable garments, for us to own fewer items, and for us to treat garment workers better? Isn't that seems like an imminently more solvable problem?
I also think this particular industry, like clothes, there's such like human behavior trigger here. Like it's one of the biggest ways we express ourselves, and so humans are always going to want the nicest thing. They're going to pay, you know, they're going to want it cheap. They're not going to. It's something that maybe they're going to care less about where it ends up or how unsustainable it is, because I don't know, it just plays on our image issues.
I think it's also like the turnover of wardrobe is relatively slow, right? So like for me, in a year, I might throw away like 10 articles of clothing if I spend time like going through my closet and actually like cleaning out. I feel like it's more, it just kind of like keeps accumulating somewhere. And so I'm not thinking like, oh, how do I like best dispose of this stuff? Because to me, it's like, oh, it's like 5 shirts. Like, worst case, it's gonna end up in the trash. But it's like 5 things versus like, every day we're like eating food or like consuming other things where you're like just constantly throwing stuff away. Um, so it's like an interesting thing where it's like you don't necessarily connect that to like the reality of the scale of this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's something where like I'd like to see from an academic point. Like I'm interested to see robots learn how to sew, but what I'm actually really interested in is for people to stop with the fast fashion, to express themselves by buying beautifully made things by well-treated workers with nice embroideries and good cuts and well made. I don't believe that any of this Gen AI trash, as I've called it, is really anyone's ideal way of expressing themselves. Sorry, Joe. And yeah, it's wild to me how the way this is positioned as a problem, like the people are the problem. No, the problem isn't the people sewing the clothes. They're the best part, actually. They're the magic silver thread that cannot be automated. They're wizards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's my anti-capitalist rant of the day. It's not me if there isn't one. So then I'll just blitz through the last few sections of my notes and we can go into speculation. In social media and advertising, there's a whole bunch of AI happening, actually. Once the clothes are in the warehouse being sold to you, totally different ballgame where AI is at an 11. Obviously, there's robots and AI in the shipping and the distribution, etc., all the Amazon warehouses, but also targeted marketing campaigns based on consumer data. AI generated ads and models. For example, there's a company called Botica.io that's integrated with Shopify, where people can post a model wearing their garment and then they can change the model without changing the garment super realistically. Unclear
Whoa.
if they can change
Wow.
the size of the model, if it's just like appearance and race, but that's that. I actually don't understand how that's legal based on advertising laws, but people are doing it. And when it comes to this like retail and consumer interaction, there's so much innovation happening
That's
here. So
yes.
personalized recommendations, virtual fitting rooms are being created where you can like upload a picture and try on clothes on your own body, like Cher in the movie Clueless. That's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Chatbots that can help you wardrobe plan and put together outfits. A really common way people interact with these fashion brands and style is through TikTok filters. Like there's cool sunglasses and things that you can wear as a TikTok filter in your digital avatar, basically. If you're a company like Stitch Fix, they claim to have AI-based styling where they use sort of algorithmic predicting of what you're going to want to wear. There's supply chain and store operations, digital commerce, and advertising. This is all full of AI. And so again, if I told you it's this weird AI sandwich, on the agriculture side, there's a ton of AI. On the commercial side, there's a ton of AI. But in the manufacturing in the middle, nothing. Crickets. People sewing
Mm-hmm.
clothes. And the last
Wow.
thing I have in my notes that I thought was really funny is I bought a new washing machine from Costco, washer dryer laundry center from LG, and there's a little AI icon on it. Like a little brain that says AI that would turn on and I'd be like,
Huh.
what's my washer dryer doing? Why has it got AI? So I Googled it. It's a scam. That's what I think. It's not AI. LG claims to have something called AI Direct Drive, which uses sensors to detect weight and fabric type of load. It then compares this information to extensive database of washing patterns and fabric characteristics. The AI algorithm analyzes the data and determines the best combination of drum movements, water levels, and washing its settings. They somehow managed to make settings seem with Babel speak. They claim that it gathers data
Yeah.
and updates the settings over time, but I'm like, no, you're not doing online learning on a washing machine. Let's be for real. It's settings. And then the other feature they have that's got an AI brain is they call it AI dry cycle. It's literally just the same dry sensor that you have for how dry is this fabric. That's
The
been on
sensor dry,
dryers for
yeah.
like forever, but now they call it AI dry. So
Hmm.
They're
you know,
like,
if you
throw
get
a regression in there and then we can call it AI.
exactly,
Does your new washer dryer connect to the internet, or is it all just in the
it
machine?
tried. There was instructions in there for me how to hook it up to Wi-Fi, and I was like, no, thank you.
Oh, wow.
I don't need
Crazy.
that. I don't need any of my appliances.
It's
talking
also
to the
like when I
internet.
think about like a load of laundry, it's definitely not homogenous. Like I'm putting towels and then like polyester and silk and bamboo sheets and like, so even if it was able to look at the type of fabric and do something about it, it's like, how are you going to optimize for 20 different fabrics in the same load? At that point, it's just like cold or hot water.
And I was cracking up because LG's treating this like it's some state secret. Like I go into their docs where they're describing how the AI works, and I try to copy paste their text to put it into my notes document, and they have jQuery running on the page to prevent copy paste, and I had to go into like developer tools and get it out of the DOM. I'm like, for real, guys, you're just protecting this automatic dry sense like that was invented in the 70s or something, or 80s. Like, get real. Like,
Interesting.
it's marketing fluff. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my talk track of the life cycle of AI in garments and in the fashion industry. I have a few notes of my personal flash forward. What could be next?
Okay, so what's the verdict, y'all? Is AI taking over Fashion Week?
I'm going to say not anytime soon, it sounds like. But I always want to say one day for these things. I think these things will be figured out. There's a lot of money, obviously, in this industry. And if they can throw it at automation, they'll find a way.
Yeah, I do have a little bit of hope for AI designs maybe making it to Fashion Week, but certainly sounds like the manufacturing is still going to be done with humans for the foreseeable future.
And I agree. AI has not taken over Fashion Week. Hasn't even taken over fast fashion. Hasn't taken over sewing. But I want to talk a bit about what could happen in the next couple of years because I think there's some interesting stuff. So, tinfoil hat being applied. What if we could make adaptive clothing that was smart? So not just change colors, but like let's say you were feeling hot. What if the fibers could like separate and become more breathy, and then you get cold and it like and it becomes more airtight? How cool would that be?
Ooh, that'd be so cool.
I also think in line with that, we talked about AI finding all sorts of new fabrics and materials, and we hear about materials that are self-healing. It would be cool if we had materials that could like self-clean, or if you rip it, it could heal. And maybe that would put a dent in, how we just toss clothes that, are dirty, are ripped, are old. That'd be cool.
Stained.
I'm waiting for something like the Black Panther suit where it can like store energy and like do all these crazy things. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like his suit,
Yeah.
like he basically, for those of you that haven't seen Black Panther, his suit can absorb energy from like punches or bullets or things like that, and then he can then redirect that energy out of his suit to have like an impulse blast and things. So that's
Or
what I'm
one that
excited
can,
for.
like Iron Man, that can automatically fold up into a little box or whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be so much cool ways. To Joe's point about this is a way of expressing yourself as a person. I think there's going to be a lot of new avenues for this, especially if we can have clothes that change texture, style, print, pattern without you having to buy new clothes. If instead of me customizing my MySpace page with, or my live journal with a little bit of HTML, I could instead do my little practice HTML on my clothing. I think teenage girls would love it.
I wonder if what needs to change is actually how we construct garments. And like if we moved away from the idea of a loom and instead found that something more like 3D printing could work. Like you talked about how they turned that fabric basically into like akin to wood or something more structured. I wonder if like we really need to change, yeah, fabric construction itself instead of trying to apply AI to the way we construct fabric today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically rethink the architecture for garments. Wow,
Yeah.
that's so interesting.
I was trying to think of like what would be the big win here. What do I want? And I can't make up my mind as to whether or not I want sewing actually to be automated and whether I want us to figure out a different way to make clothes. Because everybody doing this and investing in this technology is basically saying like, oh, they're going to get rid of the most expensive, furthest away, hardest part of manufacturing. But to me, that's a horrible way to talk about the large percentage of human beings on Earth who work in garment construction. They're not the
Mm-hmm.
problem.
It's a good point.
But it's dangerous work under abusive conditions with peanuts for pay. I don't want anybody to have to do that. I don't know if automation will solve that. Unclear.
Mm-hmm. I think there's historical precedent. I mean, automation has made things safer. You know, like even I think like mining, there's a lot more automation where humans used to be, and those injuries are no longer happening. But you do have people displaced from work, which, you know, we talk about a lot with AI.
And I found this interesting article from the boardofinnovation.com titled How Gen AI Can Help Clean Up the Fashion Value Chain. And they had some interesting ideas like reduced shipping and CO2 emissions through optimized value chain. And they shared this thing about how, I'm going to read this. Cotton is grown in the southern United States, shipped to Turkey for fabrication, then forwarded to Bangladesh for finished good productions before finally making its way to the European markets for sale. Now, let's have generative AI crunch the numbers, analyze the geographical data and the production capabilities. What if it suggests a more efficient and sustainable alternative, like get the North African cotton, manufacture it in Ethiopia, which is a neighboring region, and then ship directly to Europe? This shortens the travel distance, optimizing costs and reducing carbon footprints. This is a really cool idea. I just don't understand why we'd need AI to do this. Presumably a person could like pull out a map and figure this out. How can I reduce the costs of my operation? Oh, put things closer together. There must be other externalities.
Right. And like a hub for industry doesn't just pop up overnight. Like obviously Turkey has like history and a whole industry they built up over a very long time, I imagine. That's not something you just move. It's sort of just the way of things.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Their second suggestion was, what if we reduced water usage through smart material choice? Apparently, it takes 2,700 liters of water to create one cotton t-shirt, the equivalent of one person's drinking water for 3 years.
Oh my God.
Apparently, this
That's
is
so
an old
crazy.
statistic, and that could be less now, but if we can come up with better materials, that could be much better. And their third idea, which I think might be the best one, was reducing overproduction through data-driven supply and demand matching. So doing better predictive analytics so you're not setting, again, 30% of clothes go unworn, unsold. There has to be a way to fix that with a regression, dear Lord.
Yeah. And I mean, I think part of it sounds like reducing that startup time of, you know, we have a design to, we can fully manufacture this design. Because if that can become like a really short cycle, like days, now as demand is changing, you can actually fluctuate how much you're ordering on the order of days rather than like 6 months.
And if you can figure out how to put all these things closer together and there's less shipping time and you don't have to wait for these cargo ships to go through the Panama Canal on a schedule, then hopefully that'll speed things up too. So, yeah, I think I got cut off when I was saying this, but there was this really fancy robotics demo earlier this year which somebody, I think BMW had a cool robot and they put Chat GPT in it, and then they showed off how smart it was. And the demo was this: there was a red apple on a gray countertop, and it was able to identify it, pick it up, and hand it to somebody. And then it was able to put the gray dishes into the gray dish rack and then sort some balls of paper. To Kieran's point, it's the hardware that sucks. They barely got this robot to pick up an apple, a red, round, hard thing on a gray field. Like, they couldn't have made it higher contrast. You know?
Yeah.
That's the state of the art right now. So there's a lot of problems, a lot of automation, a lot of room for growth in this industry. And how do we best optimize for that, for the environment and people? I don't know.
It's interesting though. In like surgery, there's robots involved in surgery, and they can be very tiny and very precise. And I wonder why that sort of technology hasn't found its way into, working with tiny threads and that sort of thing.
Well, so I think the difference there is, again, it's more of a static environment. Like, the human isn't moving, right, while they're doing this. So you can have like those small, precise movements on so it sounds like when they're cutting that, hardened cloth, that's what they're trying to accomplish, is basically like create a static environment so that when the machine is doing something, the fabric or whatever is under it isn't moving around.
I'll also say,
Yeah.
Joe, think about how much that t-shirt you're wearing cost, and then think about how much laparoscopic surgery would cost.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
So that's AI and fashion. Fascinatingly, the least application of AI we've talked about so far. There is not a lot of AI happening in fashion other than in the same advertising to sell you a whole bunch of bullshit. I think it's
so
weird.
crazy though, because it's such a huge industry.
Yeah, and it's crazy that like the humans are actually not the bottleneck here. Like, there's plenty of human labor to overcreate as many garments as we want, and we might maybe need AI to help scale down these operations, which is interesting.
Somebody tell McKinsey, because more productivity, not helpful.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So that's it. That's what I have for you guys today.
Very interesting stuff, Andy. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm glad we talked about this.
Shedding light on this very interesting situation.
How many robots touched your shirt?
It sounds like maybe there was a couple in there in like the manufacturing of the like fabric itself, but a lot less than I thought.
Was I right?
I think
5?
No, I think it's 0. Because there's robots, depending on how you define robots. I'm going to say the weaving machine is not a robot. I'm going to say that if let's say robot has to have some sort of like non-deterministic action that it can execute a judgment and make a decision in some way. The actual factory and the sewing machine, I'm going to say, are not robots. And a person puts your clothes into the plastic bag. And from there, the robot's just like packing boxes and moving boxes around and stuff.
So it's not actually touching your garments.
Yeah. And that carding machines have been around. The cotton gin is a carding machine, if you guys remember that, like for making the fibers. I don't think there's any robots touching your clothes.
One of probably the very few things we interact with that robots don't touch then.
Yeah. So that's it. Happy Saturday.
Well, thank you all for sticking around in this episode. It sounds like maybe there isn't as much AI in the fashion industry as we might have thought. So lots of room for innovation here. And it might be the first application of AI we see where AI is actually helping scale down operations to become more efficient so we don't have to burn hundreds of thousands of pounds of clothing every year.
And if you are a new listener or just joining us and made it to the end for the first time, please, whatever podcasting platform you use or every podcasting platform you use, subscribe, send us a like, leave a review, leave a written review on Apple Podcasts, share us with a friend. We'd be grateful for any support as we try to reach more people.
Yeah, and if you have any feedback, you can email us at aifyipod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear about what to talk about next.
Hopefully pretty soon on our website you'll be able to buy our very own Gen AI generated trash. We will print our stuff onto ship on demand clothing for you. Yes, we will.
Yes. Check out AI FYI merch coming to a website near you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.